You know, I love horror movies. From my all-time favorite Alien, all the way to a cheesy B movie like Chopping Mall. I just really cannot get enough. Sometimes though you watch a film that's so bad, or maybe it's just mediocre, but then out of nowhere something happens that is so amazing that it becomes the only thing you remember from the film. It can be a truly creepy moment or laugh out loud hilarious. So today I figured for fun we would look at some of these scenes where a mediocre horror film suddenly found a moment of brilliance. I've never really understood how Children of the Corn became a franchise. The first film is only so-so, but every sequel that came after only got worse and worse. Maybe it's because it has Stephen King's name attached to it, but overall it's pretty weak. Children of the Corn 3 Urban Harvest only continues the series' downward trend and is the first one to go direct to video. Basically, you have a couple brothers who get adopted by a couple after one of the brothers kills their father, and then starts the Children of the Corn nonsense in the city. It's pretty cheap looking and very boring. However, the ending of the film is pretty hilarious. Eli, the evil brother, has killed their foster parents and taken control of his fellow students. When his brother Joshua finds him, he stabs Eli with a sickle, causing he who walks behind the rows to rise up as this hilariously awful looking cornstalk monster. It's like part puppet, part stop motion, and it's just awesome. The monster just starts killing all the kids that were under Eli's spell, and one girl even turns into a doll when it grabs her. The movie is pretty bad, but you can find this scene on YouTube and have yourself a good laugh. Annabelle is a boring movie. I mean, really boring. I don't know why the Conjuring movies had to become some shared universe when all they are is a generic jump scare factory. Every single movie is the exact same. It's quiet, then boo! Annabelle is a spin-off from the Conjuring films, a film based on the real-life haunted doll that paranormal fraudsters Ed and Lorraine Warren keep locked up because it's so haunted. The doll in the film is possessed by some demonic entity, and if you've seen the other Conjuring films, then you know exactly what you're getting. It's all pretty standard stuff with the exception of one single scene. When one of the main characters in the film is down in storage, she comes face to face with a demon that has taken over the doll, and it's actually kinda creepy. The best part is when she runs up the stairs and turns around, only to see it looking up at her from the steps below. It's really effective and actually works a lot better in theaters where the screens are even darker. I think the Blu-ray releases are a little too bright, giving a really clear look of the monster. It's better when you can just sort of make it out. But the filmmakers can't help themselves and ruin the whole thing with a quick jump scare for good measure. Still though, as mediocre as the movie is, this scene is still pretty good. Curtains is a fairly by-the-numbers 80s slasher film. It's about some young women that go to a director's mansion so they can audition for a role, only for them to get picked off one by a masked killer. It has all the tropes you would come to expect from a film like this, and nothing really stands out, except for one small part in the middle of the film. While one of the girls is out skating, she gets stalked by this creepy figure wearing the mask of an old woman and carrying a sickle. It's all done in slow motion and is really effective. I feel like more people have seen this part of the film through social media than have actually watched the movie. Overall, a fairly generic slasher movie, but the skating scene is definitely a memorable one. Communion is based off the book of the same name by Whitley Strieber, a man who claimed to have encounters with actual aliens. However, the movie based off his book is pretty bad. Christopher Walken stars in the film as Strieber, and it never quite lives up to expectations. It's mostly boring with a few scenes where Walken is on a spaceship with the goofiest looking aliens you've ever seen. I mean, half of them look like Gumby, and the others look like they belong in Star Wars. It's a shame too, because it does kind of start off strong. Early in the film, Walken is visited by the aliens, but you only get very brief glimpses of them. This hides how silly they actually look, but also adds a creepiness to them. Unfortunately, the rest of the movie takes a nosedive and never gets back to what was a genuinely creepy scene. Halloween 5 is a pretty awful movie, even for the Halloween series, which is riddled with awful movies. It picks up from the events of part 4, except Jamie Lloyd doesn't become the killer like planned. Instead, she's now a mute and has a psychic connection to her uncle Michael Myers. They kill off one of the only few likable characters from the previous film, and then introduce a character so grating, she might be the worst character in the franchise. Ugh, Tina.
It looks so good.
The movie has one bright spot though. Near the ending of the film, young Jamie hides inside a laundry chute, trying to evade Michael Myers. It becomes kind of tense when the young girl falls down the chute and has to try and climb back up as Michael attempts to stab her right through it. But don't worry, the movie immediately goes back to being stupid right after this scene. When a Stranger Calls plays on the classic urban legend of a babysitter who receives calls from a killer asking if she's checked on the children lately, only to find out from the police that the calls were actually coming from inside the home the entire time. Now this entry will be the longest of all the films on the list because it's not necessarily one single moment, but roughly the first 20 minutes of the movie. This whole section basically does the trope to perfection. Unfortunately, after this part, the movie is a slog to get through. 7 years later, and the killer escapes and is on the look for the babysitter from the beginning who now has her own family. But the rest of the movie really never lives up to what was really a great beginning. I feel like if that 20-minute chunk had been at the end instead of the beginning, this would have been a much better movie. Maybe they didn't want the comparison to Black Christmas, a much better movie with the same basic idea.
We've traced the call. It's coming from inside the house. A squad car's on the way over there right now.
I love a good animal attack movie, Jaws, Grizzly, but in the past 10 to 15 years, we have been served up a big pile of crap. I'm not a fan of films like Sharknado, where they are intentionally trying to make a bad film, but I will make an exception for Ghost Shark. Now this is not a good movie by any stretch of imagination. In fact, I bought this movie for one scene and one scene only. The film is about a shark that gets blown up by some hillbillies, then immediately returns as a ghost shark to get revenge not just on them, but everyone. And since it's a shark, it can appear anywhere there is water. Doesn't have to be salt water, just water. This leads to some silly scenes where the shark attacks people in a pool, and some bikini car wash girls. But the one and only reason I bought the film was for a scene in which a boy is eaten by the shark while sliding down a slip and slide. The moment is so stupid that when I first saw it, I immediately ordered a copy from the UK because it's not even available here, or it wasn't at the time. The movie overall is pretty bad, but this one scene made it all worth it. Doom has to be one of the most depressing movie experiences I've ever had. I'm a huge Doom fan, been playing the game since they first released in the early 90s, so I was hyped as hell when a movie was announced. I was also a big wrestling fan around that time, so I thought, a Doom movie with The Rock? How could they go wrong? Well, fuck me if they didn't royally screw this one up. The premise is so simple. You have scientists open a portal to hell while messing around with teleportation on Mars. Then you send in some space marines to clean up the mess, leaving one lone marine to fight the cyber demon and spider mastermind. Instead, we get some garbage with genetic experimentation or something, and people are turning into the monsters. It's all really dumb, it looks cheap, and it's a huge letdown. There is one scene in the movie that is at least somewhat entertaining. Near the end, the movie goes first person as we see through Karl Urban's character while he dispatches some monsters. They at least tried to make it feel like the games during this part, and for that, I will at least give it some props. Still though, this is not a good movie. This one will be controversial. I don't think Signs is a bad movie, but it's kind of boring and maybe a bit too long. Also, the twist at the end is pretty stupid. The film is basically about a reverend who has lost his faith after a car accident takes his wife's life. Aliens show up on Earth and he has to do whatever he can to protect his family. The movie plays out more like a drama than a horror film, but there are some decently creepy scenes sprinkled throughout. However, there is one scene in particular that really stands above the rest and I think is still really effective. Throughout the movie, Joaquin Phoenix's character starts to become more and more obsessed with the news coverage of the supposed aliens, when some breaking news comes in showing footage from a child's birthday in Brazil. The scene is very quick and genuinely creepy. Yeah, it's a take on the old Patterson Bigfoot footage, but it works so well. It's just a shame the rest of the movie doesn't quite live up to this one fantastic scene. Tag is a really strange movie. You have a young girl who seems to be the target of some pretty violent deaths. Anywhere she is, death seems to follow. I mean, I really can't show much, but it all really comes down to the beginning of the movie. You have a bus full of Japanese schoolgirls when a killer gust of wind, yes, a gust of wind, literally cuts all of the girls in half. Maybe you've seen this clip somewhere before and weren't sure where it came from, but it's from this movie. There's more gore throughout the movie and more of that deadly wind, but this really is the standout scene. In the end, it turns out it was all a video game or something, and the girl has been dead for 150 years or so, but was brought back in the game using her DNA by a boy that liked her and wanted to be with her. But how is he still alive? I have no idea. Regardless, that opening scene is really all you need to see in this film. House of Wax came hot on the heels of remakes like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Dawn of the Dead, except nowhere near as good as either one of those. The film is a loose, and I mean loose, remake of the original Vincent Price classic. On the way to a football game, a group of friends end up at a wax museum where one by one they're killed. Pretty standard stuff, but the cheap production makes it look like something you would find on the CW. One of the worst parts about the film was whoever decided casting Paris Hilton would be a great idea. However, it does lead to the one truly enjoyable moment in the film when Paris Hilton takes the sharp end of a piece of metal straight through her noggin. I remember seeing this in theaters and people cheering, but outside of this one brief moment, the rest of the movie is really bad. I love Hellraiser 1 and 2, but I don't know what the hell happened with 3. I know this movie has its fans, but it doesn't really feel like a Hellraiser movie to me. It's like the studio wanted their own Freddy Krueger, so they pushed Pinhead to the forefront of everything, when the focus of these movies was never really on him. They also turned Pinhead into a more generic monster, losing the essence of what made him so unique. But there is a pretty fun sequence in the film where Pinhead invades a nightclub and starts offing people left and right. It's really out of character for Pinhead, but it doesn't matter because it's still pretty entertaining. While I'm not the biggest fan of this movie, I still find it watchable at least. It's not the worst thing in the world, but that scene in the nightclub is definitely the standout. Jason Goes to Hell is a truly bizarre entry in the Friday the 13th series. Long gone are the days of Jason simply stalking young adults at Camp Crystal Lake. Now he's a body-swapping demon who's trying to find one of his family members so he can be reborn. A very weird concept for what is a pretty by-the-numbers series. Even though it has one or two fun kills in the movie, the real standout is at the very end. After Jason is sent to hell, a very familiar hand rises from the dirt to pull his mask into the underworld. Yeah, that's Freddy Krueger's hand, and when this first came out, that was a pretty big deal. Now remember, this was 1993. There wasn't really an internet to spoil things for everyone, so people really had no idea this was coming. It wouldn't be for another decade until Freddy vs. Jason would finally come out, but this scene kept fans speculating for years. Alright, I'm definitely cheating with this one, because I actually like Inferno and I think it's pretty good, if not a little confusing at times. The film follows a man named Mark who goes to New York after his sister is killed while investigating what might be a witch. The film is a loose sequel to Suspiria and has all the trappings you would come to expect when watching a 1970s, 1980s Italian horror film. The reason why I wanted to include this one is because of one shot in particular. At the end of the film, the lead is confronted by the woman who reveals herself to be the witch. And she isn't just a witch. In one of the greatest transitions I've ever seen in a movie, the woman becomes death personified as she crashes through a mirror. This scene has remained rent-free in my head ever since I first saw the film way back in the early 2000s. The rest of the movie is pretty good as well, but this scene for me has always been the standout.
They call us!
Wes Craven has made some pretty good films over the years. Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, but Deadly Friend isn't exactly one of them. In it, you have a teen who's something of a computer genius who implants a chip in a friend of his who's supposed to be brain dead, only for her to come back to life and start killing people. The movie is pretty silly overall, but does have one very memorable scene. A miserable old woman in the film who is constantly threatening the kids with a shotgun named Elvira comes face to face with the rampaging robot girl and gets her head caved in with a basketball. It's one of the most over-the-top deaths you'll ever see in a film, and I wish I could show you, but unfortunately the YouTube overlords would not be happy with that. You can easily find it online, so if you're interested, I recommend looking it up. Sleepaway Camp is a pretty generic slasher film. While I like it, I think most people would find it to be rather boring. The deaths aren't all that interesting, the acting is really bad, and there really isn't anything to make it stand out from other films from the time. Although there is a creepy camp cook that stares at the children coming into the camp and he refers to them as baldies, which is really fucking weird. And the other camp workers all around him just laugh like, oh, classic pedophile Bob. But as generic as the film is, it does have one of the greatest twists in cinema history. During the film, you have a young girl Angela who keeps getting picked on, and her cousin Ricky is kind of set up to be the killer. However, once you get to the end of the film, you find out Angela was the killer all along, and she was a boy. The movie as a whole is okay, but that ending, especially back in 1983, really made it stand out.
How can it be?
Deep Blue Sea is a pretty bad movie, but it's still fun. You've got an ocean research facility where mako sharks are being genetically engineered as a means to find a way of fighting Alzheimer's. Of course, everything goes wrong, and the sharks are now on the loose and everyone is on the menu. The premise is so ridiculous, but still pretty entertaining. However, there is one scene in particular that really takes the cake. About an hour into the film, as chaos has erupted and the survivors have lost all hope, Sam Jackson gives a rousing speech to help boost everyone's confidence, only for a shark to pop up and eat him in one of the worst special effects you will ever see. I mean, this is some PlayStation 1 graphics we're talking about. The rest of the movie is still fairly enjoyable for how silly it is, but this is easily the best part. I think most people, whether they've seen Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2 or not, know exactly where I'm going with this one. Nearly half of this movie is just reused footage from the first. I believe that's because the first movie was removed from theaters after moms protested its release and had it removed. The filmmakers needed to try and recoup some of that lost money, so they just slapped together some new footage, combined it with footage from the first movie, and you've got a sequel. Ricky, the brother of the killer from the first film, basically picks up where his brother left off and starts offing people he believes are naughty. This brings us to one of the funniest scenes in any movie ever, when Ricky goes on a neighborhood shooting spree and utters the line, "Garbage Day." The delivery and then the laughs after are so stupid, but are really the standouts of the film. If you want a good laugh, do yourself a favor and search this scene out.
Garbage Day! Huh? No!
Ghost Ship is basically the reason why I wanted to make this video in the first place. The movie is pretty bad, but has one of the best openings you'll ever see in a movie. You've got a nice luxury liner in 1962, and everyone is just having a great time dancing and enjoying some music. Then suddenly some metal wire tightens and snaps, sending it flying through the crowd and slicing everyone in half. Yeah, it defies any and all logic, especially when you see each person seems to be cut at different heights, but it's still a really great scene. The scene is so good that most people forget there's still another hour and 20 minutes left in the film. There's a good reason for that too, because the rest of the movie is a boring slog to sit through. And you know you're in 2002 when the film ends with some Mudvayne playing while the survivor realizes the horror isn't quite over. So there you have it, some mediocre horror films with at least one standout scene. Have you seen any of the films listed? And if so, what are your thoughts? Also, what are some films you think maybe aren't the best, but have at least one really good scene? Let me know down below in the comments because I cannot wait to hear what you have to say. Anyways, that's all for today. I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you in the next video.